Hi guys, welcome back to another video. I am Lemon Cat Podfic, and today I'm going to be reading It's What's on the Inside That Counts by Shakespeare over on AO3. This is a teens and up fic with no archive warnings applying. It is a shindeku. Summary. Midoriya. Hitoshi's own voice sounds like it's underwater, weak and halted at how close Midoriya suddenly is to him. So much so that he can see the specks of hazel in his eyes. I need to get away, he wants to say, but it's so hard to get words out of a dry throat. Midoriya finishes the sentence for him. However, it's not with what he expects. You need blood. Or, Hitoshi gets his quirk swapped with Toga's. If there's anything that Shinsou Hitoshi is the most used to, it's his quirk. Whether that be the intricacies of it, or the shaming that came with it, he's used to it. Though, he'd say that the shaming has gotten significantly better, going from full-on bullying, to isolation, to less than lawful implications, to nothing at all, and then, surprisingly, to words of fascination. The last thing comes from a lot of UA's local bone destroyer, Midoriya Izuku. Ever since Hitoshi had transferred into the hero course, he would always be bombarded with questions about his quirk and offers to spar with him. He only considered it annoying at first. He needed time to settle into this new schedule, after all. But then that annoyance turned to something else that he didn't recognize until it was too late. Something fluttery and warm and excruciatingly sweet. Midoriya is nice to everyone, and Hitoshi should have known he'd end up catching feelings for the first person who took such a passionate interest in something so villainous such as his quirk. He spends weeks thinking he'll get over these pesky feelings, thinking that all of their class probably had the same problem he has at one point, and have had a brief crush on the freckled sunshine boy. But those weeks do nothing but make his heart race faster and faster with every instance that Midoriya praises his hard work on the road to heroics. Hitoshi swears he's doomed, that not even his bored and aloof personality will save him from Midoriya. It eats at him every single night when sleep doesn't come easy, giving him half dreams where he gets to hold the other close, tip Midoriya's chin up, and lean down to brush their lips together. He always wakes up before any more contact is made, something he doesn't know whether is good for him or not. Hitoshi needs to get rid of these feelings. How will he be able to focus on heroics if he doesn't? He'll be too distracted by Midoriya's sweet, blushy face while in training, or worse, in an actual fight, and then he'll either be seeing stars or sleeping with the fishes. However, getting over Midoriya is, well, it's difficult. Especially when he's so kind with his words. It's shameful, really. Hitoshi should be the one who's good with words, considering he needs to be with the quirk he has. Yet Midoriya always has those damn words of encouragement whenever Hitoshi fails, and Hitoshi has been failing a lot lately. Midoriya is like the sun, bright and shining brilliantly over everything, and Hitoshi is burning to a crisp that'll pretty soon be nothing but ash. He needs to get over this. It is a must, especially when the only other option would be confessing to the other. How awkward would it be to be rejected by the kindest student in the class? Humiliating. Hitoshi just needs to spend time away from him until this passes. It's probably just meant to get worse before it gets better, so he'll wait it out until that sickly sweet feeling inside of him evaporates and he's back to himself. That's the plan anyway. But anyone going into heroics should know that plans sometimes don't go accordingly, and a backup is needed. Hitoshi has no backup because he's an idiot who didn't think that far ahead. But really, how was he supposed to predict that he'd been chosen to accompany Midoriya when said boy is given permission to leave campus to run to the store? Scratch that, he should have seen it coming. Of course Midoriya would need supervision when leaving campus. Aizawa even calls him problem child, for crying out loud. I'm sorry you got dragged into this, Shinsou, Midoriya says apologetically as they walk along the sidewalk as twilight sets in. It's no problem, Hitoshi says in response. A lie. He knows it's a problem, not only because his stomach is way too fluttery, but because luck never seems to be on his side, especially when they run into a familiar face. Well, Familiar isn't the word Hitoshi would find himself using, but he thinks Midoriya would, if the shock on his face is anything to go by when they bump into a girl with a hood pulled over her head, said hood becoming obstructed by the collision as blonde hair can be seen. An apology dies on Midoriya's lips when yellow, cat-like eyes widen and a grin pulls up on the girl's face upon recognizing him, leaving Hitoshi confused on why Midoriya would look so panicked. That is, until she tries to stab him, pulling a knife seemingly out of nowhere. Hitoshi barely has time to pull a stunned Midoriya out of the way before the blade can slice him up, becoming even more bewildered when seeing the lovey-dovey expression the girl has on, even though she'd literally just tried to harm the shorter boy. Hitoshi starts to take everything much more seriously when Midoriya gets into a fighting stance after regaining his balance, and he's so thankful that he brought his capture weapon with him. The girl seems to understand she's probably not going to win in a 2-against-1 fight, and, luckily for her, and very unluckily for Midoriya and he, there's a jingle of a shop bell near where the blonde is standing, indicating that someone is exiting. She wastes no time grabbing the unsuspecting bystander/hostage and holds the knife to their throat when they make a squeak mixed with confusion and fear. The girl says, while still making hard eyes at Midoriya, and then sending a glare at Hitoshi. Izuku-kun, don't you miss me? Let them go. There's no need to bring a civilian into this, Midoriya orders, eyes straight ahead and fists raised. There's only the tiniest of trembles that Hitoshi can spot, because he's right beside him. Hitoshi is so close, maybe 10 feet away from where the girl and her hostage are. If he uses his capture weapon, he might be able to dislodge the blade from the girl's grip, but it's risky. He'll have to brainwash her. Except the blonde is paying hardly any mind to Hitoshi, now that Midoriya is talking to her and trying to negotiate. He doubts she'll respond to him. Now is the perfect time to grab the hostage. Hitoshi snaps his capture weapon forward, knocking the knife out of the girl's hand, and then he springs forward to grab the other person and get them out of harm's way. Except, in the midst of all this, Midoriya's gasp, the angered growl from the girl, all from Hitoshi's rash decision, the hostage startles and lets out a scream while fear takes over their features. And then Hitoshi's head feels like it's splitting as he tips over. Shinsou, can you hear me? Echoes in Hitoshi's brain like he's in an amphitheater. He slowly blinks his eyes open, finding his vision as groggy as himself. The first thing he sees after it clears a bit is his classmate there in front of him. What happened? Hitoshi asks, while rubbing the blurriness from his eyes. You were accidentally hit with a quirk. Don't worry, an ambulance and Aizawa are on the way to make sure everything's okay. Midoriya goes on to explain, asking 2 quick questions to who Hitoshi recognizes as the hostage that the girl had previously taken. He sits up from where he's slumped against the side of a building, eyes darting in search of the person who had attacked them, but he doesn't find her, instead seeing the flashing light of the ambulance Midoriya had mentioned, as well as another vehicle that their teacher is stepping out of. Hitoshi doesn't get to ask that many questions, too busy being checked by the paramedics for any injuries, and aside from a mild headache and his usual tiredness, he feels fine. They don't get to go back to UA right away, having to give a statement to police about what had happened. Apparently the girl that had attacked them, Toga Himiko according to Midoriya, had gotten away while Hitoshi was unconscious for a brief few minutes. On the ride back, Aizawa explains that after getting the statement from the bystander, they'd mentioned accidentally setting off their quirk in a moment of fear. The quirk mentioned makes Hitoshi's body tense when he finds out what it is. A quirk-swapping quirk. Midoriya's eyes are alight, his fingers twitching like he wants to write all of this down. He turns to where he sits next to Hitoshi in the back seat of the car. Does that mean your brainwashing isn't working? He ponders, convincing Hitoshi to try it out on him to test that theory. Midoriya's eyes stay green when Hitoshi attempts to grab a hold of his consciousness, finding himself grasping at nothing instead of the regular pole. I can't, Hitoshi says after 3 failed attempts. Is it really gone? It's temporary, Aizawa mentions from the passenger seat. The info we got says it can last roughly 3 weeks. We'll still have you 2 checked out by Recovery Girl when we get back.
But Shinsou, it looks like you'll be doing quirkless training until it wears off.
Hitoshi nods absent-mindedly, letting his head rest on the window. This is surely going to be a long couple weeks. Sleep, surprisingly, comes easy for Hitoshi. He figures that it's because of this whole weird quirk, and maybe that his brainwashing had an effect on his sleep patterns or some other bizarre reasoning that Midoriya would probably be better at coming up with since he's so interested in quirks. Yet, despite him getting the type of rest he hasn't gotten in a long time thanks to his insomnia, he still feels uneasy about someone else having his quirk. Hitoshi has always believed that his quirk was meant for villainy, that it was lucky that he had no desire to use it for no good. But now, someone who likes to hurt people has it, and is probably using it right now to do all of the things that people probably think Hitoshi would do with it. Sleep comes easy, but it sure doesn't come peacefully. When Hitoshi wakes up, his mouth hurts, like he's a little kid in the dentist's office with a mouth full of cavities. His gums ache and are sore, and he can barely open his groggy eyes, enough to wander down the hall of the dorms to the restrooms to brush his teeth and hope that'll help. He'll probably need to get them checked out if they were fine yesterday and are now full of a mild but annoying pain. His toothbrush falls from his hand and clatters to the floor when he looks in the mirror. Normally, Hitoshi would be used to his disheveled appearance, especially in the morning when his hair is a mess and his eyes are half closed. But it's not exactly his entire self that has his eyes widening like dinner plates. No, it's the two unnaturally pointed teeth poking out of his mouth, and the two fangs. What the hell? Hitoshi feels dizzy from the bewilderment, mind swimming. He hadn't had these yesterday. Had they grown in last night? That had to be the case. But why would... Wait a minute. Did Hitoshi ask what the quirk he'd been swapped with even was? When the shock fades enough for Hitoshi to stop leaning over the sink, he's turning around to leave and go find the answer to his question. Seriously, how dumb was he to not ask about the quirk that he's going to be stuck with for almost 3 weeks? When turning a corner down the hall, Hitoshi's racing thoughts distract him so much that he collides with someone, stumbling back a bit, but catching himself in time to not fall onto his behind. "Oh, I'm sorry," says a voice that's too familiar, causing Hitoshi's brain to screech to a halt. "It's fine," Hitoshi says to Midoriya, who's now here in front of him. "I was coming to check up on you to see if you were doing all right with that new quirk." Midoriya's words suddenly cut off as his eyes widen while staring at Hitoshi, gaze trained on his mouth. Hitoshi's got his eyes on the other boy's mouth as well, but for a much different reason. That reason being his big, fat crush, and the way Midoriya's plush lips part as if in awe. "Those weren't there last night," he observes, while reaching his hands out to Hitoshi's cheeks and pulling at the sides of his mouth, very effectively causing Hitoshi to blue screen. A delayed reaction to that person's quirk? Or maybe that's just how it works. Is there anything else different? Did you see when these grew in? Midoriya, Hitoshi cuts in with a shameful stutter, the word almost garbled because there are fingers practically hooked onto the sides of his mouth like he's at the dentist, except there's no laughing gas to ease his nerves. The opposite, in fact. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, the shorter boy rushes out while stepping back and pulling his hands away, as if realizing just now that personal space is a thing. Hitoshi would say he didn't mind, but with his gay thoughts about him uncomfortably fuzzy and his gums still aching, he'd rather not be touched at the moment. "I need to ask you something," Hitoshi says, after his brain can send the message to his vocal cords without trouble. "That girl that attacked us, what was her quirk?" Hitoshi had gotten the gist of most things during the time that he'd had to give a statement to the police last night about how they'd run into one of the League of Villains members and were attacked. It was the first run-in that Hitoshi had ever had with said group, but he figures Midoriya would know more. Midoriya seems to light up again at the mention of quirks. "Her quirk lets her take on other people's forms, kinda like shape-shifting," he answers. That doesn't exactly explain the fangs. Hitoshi would have thought it had something to do with biting, or maybe an animal-type quirk. "What are these for, then?" He points to the sharpened teeth in his mouth. "Oh, well, in order to transform, she has to drink someone's blood. Midoriya answers casually. Hitoshi feels his stomach drop. Seriously? He's pretty much a vampire for the duration of this quirk. Hitoshi is not digging that idea at all, especially when the metallic smell of blood has always made his nose scrunch up. Are you feeling all right? You look kind of pale, Midoriya voices concern once Hitoshi goes quiet. Do you need me to walk you to Recovery Girl? I know she checked us yesterday, but the teeth are a new development, and I'm sure Aizawa will understand if we're late, considering the circumstances.
I think I'll be fine,
Hitoshi reassures. Other than his slightly sore mouth, he can't find that there's anything wrong with him. He just wishes that he had his own quirk back. Something that he never thought he'd wished for, if only not to have to sit out quirk enhancement training for the next foreseeable few weeks.
Shinsou, looking fantastic today.
Hitoshi would strangle Kaminari if he had his binding cloth with him right now, but, unfortunately, his school uniform is all that's allowed during non-training school hours. Maybe if he's lucky, Aizawa will do it for him, seeing as he gives the blonde a glare and tells everyone to get into their seats so he can begin class. Dealing with his classmates this morning while on the way to homeroom would have had him in a grumpy mood had he not gotten much sleep, especially with the dumb puns. He swears that if he hears Ashido make one more Twilight reference, he's gonna drop out. Heroics be damned. Maybe Hitoshi should have taken a sick day, but he's already behind because of the transfer. He needs to pick up the pace or he'll get left behind in the training curriculum. It's bad enough he'll be missing some weeks of quirk training because of this. He was working so hard to be able to hold his brainwashing for longer. If only he wasn't so impulsive, then he wouldn't have acted so rash that night. He should have followed Midoriya's lead. He has more experience than Hitoshi does, after all. Maybe then Hitoshi wouldn't be struggling to chew his food with a pair of pointed teeth in the way, or accidentally stabbing his tongue with them every so often. He'll have to deal with it, as unfortunate as it seems. Hitoshi's gums stop hurting before the first day is over, something that he's more than thankful for. He's gotten pretty used to the feeling of having fangs, and he sometimes catches himself running his tongue along the sides of them. Something that he isn't getting used to is the other thing that had developed recently, and he's pretty sure it's not something he wants to get used to, at all. It starts with absent-mindedly staring at Midoriya, nothing unusual, considering his crush on said boy, but Hitoshi only notices after a whole class session goes by that he'd not retained a single word Aizawa had said, much too busy gazing at the back of Midoriya's neck. It's nothing at first, but Hitoshi finds it odd that he'd find the other boy's neck so fascinating. There's much more that Hitoshi likes about him physically, like his smile, his bright eyes, his biceps, and many other attributes that Hitoshi could go on about. His neck, though? Hitoshi doesn't understand why he's taken an interest in it. Sure, Midoriya's got a nice neck, with pretty freckles that are probably scattered over his collarbone and shoulders. Hitoshi wouldn't mind nuzzling up against it, maybe leaving a few kisses, maybe sinking his teeth in. Hitoshi smacks both of his hands over his cheeks, the loud smack making the class go quiet, while a few people turn to look at him. He hates that a pair of green eyes are included in the bunch.
Shinsou, is there something you want to discuss that's more important than today's lesson?
Aizawa says with a deadpan stare, clearly unamused at his teaching being interrupted. Hitoshi shakes his head, shame burning on his cheeks. The worst part is that it gets, well, worse. He doesn't mean to stare at everyone's necks during passing and at lunch. In fact, he doesn't want to at all. But it's like his stupid brain has been taken over by this quirk and is making him feel like he's going nuts. He'd rather have his insomnia back than have to deal with craving actual blood. Hitoshi has tasted his own blood before when sparring went a tad bit too far. It's bitter and gross, and he always gives thanks to his voice modulator for protecting his face, so broken noses and busted lips are kept to a minimum. Even when Hitoshi makes sure to eat a balanced meal, the cravings are still there, barely letting him function. He even shamefully started salivating one time when one of his classmates had gotten a paper cut, so much that he hid in the restroom for the remainder of class. He needs to get his shit together and make it through this week so the Quirk Swap will go away and he'll be back to his normal self instead of this blood-craving weirdo who stares at people's necks and tries to imagine what their blood tastes like. And to top it all off, he's been having nightmares. It's not exactly a side effect from this quirk, like the fangs and cravings are. Nope. Just a product of his own issues that haven't left him ever since his own quirk had come in. Terrible images of his brainwashing being used by the League, of that girl smiling the same wicked smile she had on when he'd seen her, brainwashing heroes and civilians alike to attack one another. He wishes he had his insomnia back, so he wouldn't have to dream those horrors every night. 4 days in, and Aizawa makes him sit out of training, even if it was just quirkless sparring. The pro says it's because Hitoshi is zoning out too much in both class and heroics training, which isn't necessarily wrong. It's just that Aizawa thinks it's because of lack of sleep and not weird cravings that leave him almost aching, bad nightmares, and way too much self-doubt. Oh, and those pesky feelings of affection that have somehow tripled because of how intense this new quirk is on his body. Hitoshi wants to practically pounce on Midoriya whenever he's around, and aiming that cute smile at him. Maybe Hitoshi should keep a spray bottle for himself if he's gonna act like some animal around the other. Why can't he just act normal in front of his crush? Because the universe hates him, apparently. Shinsou, have you got a minute? Midoriya waves him down as Hitoshi is walking to his dorm after taking a few laps around the school in hopes that it would distract his body from wanting blood. It was a failed attempt. What is it? Hitoshi asks, while trying to calm his heart, an effort that doesn't do much since it's still pounding wildly against his ribcage. I wanted to ask, well, if it's okay with you, he says while fidgeting, if I can take some notes on the quirk you have right now? I just think it would be a good opportunity. Hitoshi feels a hand go to the back of his neck, a nervous reflex that he's had a hard time breaking. It's not mine, so I don't exactly know much about it. That's okay. I just had a couple questions and stuff. Anything would be helpful, and I'm sure Aizawa would be happy to give even the smallest amount of info to Detective Tsukayuchi. There's hopefulness in Midoriya's eyes as he looks up at Hitoshi, who's trying to keep his feelings in line. Well, I guess that's all right, Hitoshi says, in admittance of defeat. Though, did he ever really stand a chance when it comes to Midoriya's persuasively pretty face? That's how Hitoshi finds himself with his crush in his dorm room, instead of the quiet night he'd intended to have, grabbing pillows for them to sit on the floor, while Midoriya finds a fresh page in his notebook to start on. I know you haven't probably had a chance to try and use it, Midoriya starts. I don't plan to, Hitoshi interrupts, appalled by the idea of himself drinking blood, despite this quirk making him want to do just that. I bet, Midoriya giggles. But, have you noticed anything different, at all? Besides the teeth, obviously. Hitoshi feels reluctant to inform the other that this stupid quirk is making him daydream about what his classmates' blood tastes like, and he's definitely not too keen on letting him know about the way it's amplified Hitoshi's not-so-clean thoughts about him. He instead lets Midoriya know about his theory on how he thinks his insomnia is linked to his brainwashing. Because now it's gone, he's gotten more nights of rest. It seems to be enough to get the shorter boy into a mumbling fit, long enough for Hitoshi to do some subtle breathing exercises to maybe get his pulse to slow, but it's rather hard to accomplish when his crush is sitting so close to him. You know, I did have a theory or two on how a person's quirk could affect their interests, Midoriya notes once he's filled up half a page. Well, if you have an interest in quirks, but that doesn't really have much in common with super strength, Hitoshi points out. It's still just a theory, Midoriya says to that. Besides, it's not like you suddenly have a fascination with blood. He laughs, the noise gradually dying off when he looks over to Hitoshi's face, and there's no response to that. You haven't, right? Hitoshi's eyes find the floor when Midoriya's stare becomes too much. Shinsou. There might be some, side effects. Well, why didn't you say? Is blood drinking one of the side effects? Midoriya asks, no tone in his voice indicating that he's disgusted, which has a mild surprise crossing over Hitoshi because, well, who wouldn't be grossed out by that? 1A's problem child, apparently. I haven't drank any. It's just... Why does Hitoshi feel so ashamed to admit something that isn't even his fault? I've been wanting to a lot. Well, not wanting, but craving it. It makes me ache sometimes. Midoriya looks up from his notes. It's hurting you. Not much, don't worry. Hitoshi is quick to reassure, even though it's been making his head spin the more he tries to sway his mind anywhere but the slope of a curved neck. It's just something I'm not used to. He sighs then, head tipping back and falling into the side of the mattress he's leaning against. I never thought I'd want my brain washing back so much. Yeah, it is pretty useful, Midoriya chuckles. And I bet you're sick of having to deal with these temporary changes. Hitoshi wants to nod, but he keeps his head still, eyes to the ceiling instead of his crush, so he can do some steady breathing. I bet the League is finding it pretty useful too, he mutters, not meaning to say his frustration out loud. But fuck, it's really been eating at him nearly every single second of the day and during every one of those horrid nightmares, and now it's all in the open too. There's a chance that it'll wear off before Toga even notices, Midoriya points out. Plus, she doesn't know that the quirk that hit her was a swapping one. What if they figure it out before it's too late, though? Hitoshi can't help but say, his throat not filtering the words he wants to say and instead putting everything forth. What if they're out there using it the way everyone thinks it would be used? They've got the perfect villain's quirk in their hands to use for whatever they... There's warm and callous skin over Hitoshi's mouth that stops his rushed words. You don't have a villain's quirk, Midoriya states. No quirk is inherently good or bad. It's what people choose to do with it that makes it either of those. He goes on, not removing his hand from Hitoshi's mouth. Hitoshi hopes Midoriya doesn't notice how hot his own face is growing just from the contact. You think my quirk is heroic, yeah? Midoriya goes on, waiting for Hitoshi to agree, and once he gets a nod, he continues. If it was me instead of you who got their quirk swapped, would you be less worried since the villains would have a heroic quirk with them instead? The image, as brief as it is, of that menacing grin while Toga wields Midoriya's destructive power sends a shiver up his spine. Though, his other nerve-racing thought is an image of Midoriya with a pair of cute fangs. Trying and failing to pronounce words over them has the same effect as well. Still, Hitoshi shakes his head. Another sweet smile finds its way onto that freckled face, bright and warm like the sun. Hitoshi has to be thankful that he's not an actual vampire, 'cause he's sure he'd be dust right now. See, there's nothing bad about the way you use your quirk, Shinsou. In fact, I think it goes to show how much of a good person you are for even worrying about that. Another blinding smile lights up the room. It's what's on the inside that counts, and you've got a hero heart. Hitoshi feels his heart race at the almost praise from the other. If it were anyone else, Hitoshi would scoff and think of them as a suck-up, but whenever it's from his crush, his knees go weak. However, since it's from his crush while Hitoshi's body is still whack with these cravings, and making everything tingly and sharp, Hitoshi's reaction is a lot more than just weak knees. And it definitely doesn't help that Midoriya still got his hand over Hitoshi's mouth, right under his nose, where he can smell the scent of mint and soap clinging to the skin. Hitoshi's heart feels like it's pumping fire through his body instead of blood as he pushes himself back and away from the other man with haste, the aches he's been feeling returning tenfold as a short groan makes it halfway past his lips. The aches were never anything past being a mild nuisance. Very different from the surge of liquid fire rushing through his veins and scorching him from the inside out. And the worst part? He bets he looks like an absolute idiot while hunched over in pain. He wishes he could actually turn it to dust right now, or maybe into a bat so he could fly out the window and hide away in a cave for a few hundred years. Shinsou, Midoriya's voice sounds startled and worried from Hitoshi's sudden action. What's wrong? He's scooting closer on his knees to Hitoshi. Nothing's wrong, Hitoshi attempts at saying, the words coming out strained as his gums start stinging like the day these annoying fangs had first grown in. Something clearly is, Midoriya says to that. Is it aches from the cravings? You said it wasn't that bad. This isn't not that bad, Shinsou, he chides, though the worriment in his voice doesn't dismiss. Hitoshi wants to reassure him, but he's having a hard time simply reassuring himself, especially when he barely catches himself before tipping over. It definitely does not help that he feels a pair of hands on his shoulders, keeping him steady. "We gotta get you to recovery, girl," Midoriya says with haste. "She can help you, or at least call for someone who can—" "Midoriya." Hitoshi's own voice sounds like it's underwater, weak and halted at how close Midoriya suddenly is to him. So much so that he can see the specks of hazel in his eyes. "I need to get away," he wants to say, but it's so hard to get words out of a dry throat. Midoriya finishes the sentence for him. However, it's not with what he expects. "You need blood." The air in the room feels clammy as Hitoshi's vision unblurs enough to see Midoriya tugging down the collar of his own shirt. "I'm sure that there's an aspect of the quirk that makes it safe to drink, even if it's in a different body," Midoriya states nonchalantly. "And if it helps to ease the pain until we can get you help, you're welcome to drink my—" Hitoshi doesn't let him finish before he's shaking his head wildly, getting dizzy again in the process. There's no way that he's going to allow himself to do that. Not only because the thoughts of that metallic taste going into his mouth sounds appalling, but also because he doesn't know how the hell he'll be able to even control himself if he gets a whiff of blood. "I trust you, Shinsou," Midoriya says then, as if reading Hitoshi's very doubts, wearing an earnest face while staring at Hitoshi intently. Hitoshi feels like he's on fire, head swimming in a boiling vat of emotions that he can't place a name on. The feelings he has for Midoriya, the subtle praise from said boy, the proximity, and the assurance of trust has Hitoshi's body moving before his already overheated brain can tell him to stop. Midoriya is shoved backwards with Hitoshi's hand cushioning the back of his head, green eyes widening for a moment, or maybe longer than a moment. Hitoshi wouldn't know. He's too busy nuzzling his face into the crook of the shorter boy's neck, feeling the soft skin and thrumming pulse under his lips. The aching in his gums starts to throb when he feels a shiver run down him, or maybe that shiver is from the body underneath him. Either way, his mind feels both scorched and fluttery at the same time, enough to drive him mad. Midoriya makes no move to push Hitoshi away or indicate he wants him to stop. All that there is one long and steady breath, the exhale coming out in a shudder when Hitoshi lets the pointed fangs poke at the soft flesh without breaking it. He waits a bit, giving Midoriya another chance to tell Hitoshi that this is such a stupid idea. But when there's no words leaving the other, just the sound of his breathing and his heartbeat, Hitoshi caves. The moment that the skin breaks and wet warmth touches Hitoshi's lips, it feels like every one of his senses has become amplified. His head is floating and full of so much soft and fuzzy warmth, heartbeat racing at the tiny gasp the boy under him makes when Hitoshi suckles at the two small punctures. Hitoshi feels warm, warm, warm. He doesn't want to vacate from where he's pressed so close and intimately to Midoriya. He hadn't even realized that he'd found a cozy spot between the other's legs, and he's positive that when this rush fades away, he'll be absolutely mortified from the sheer embarrassment. But right now, he's in heaven. No longer is there that gross copper taste he'd get whenever blood got into his mouth, instead replaced by a fiery sweetness on his tongue that sends tingles through his body. Hitoshi wants more, wants to be pressed closer, but he can't. Midoriya said he trusts him, and Hitoshi isn't going to ruin that. But still, when pulling off just a bit and licking over the bruise that's forming, those pesky quirk-enhanced impulses let him be selfish and leave a peppering of kisses over the bite, feather light and trailing up, 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 without him realizing before it's much too late that his blood-stained lips are at the corner of Midoriya's mouth. This is a bad idea. This is a bad, terrible idea that isn't even an idea, really. Just Hitoshi's stupid, blood-drunk body hijacking his sense of logic. This goes way beyond Midoriya's trust and kind offer to help Hitoshi get rid of the aches. This is practically Hitoshi violating him. There's no way Midoriya is gonna even want to speak to Hitoshi after this. Yet, when Hitoshi brushes his lips over the plush skin, Midoriya makes no move to push him away. In fact, he turns his head to angle his lips closer until they're slotted together, and oh, Hitoshi feels like he may die right here and now. Midoriya's lips are so soft, and Hitoshi feels lightheaded while pressing a kiss there. And then, to make matters worse, or better, at this point he can't tell, Hitoshi feels fingers carting through his hair, from the base of his head and up to the center, pulling him impossibly closer and making his synapses tingle as Midoriya kisses him back. It's like an electric shock to Hitoshi, especially when the boy underneath him makes such a cute noise when Hitoshi accidentally pokes at his bottom lip with these ridiculously inconvenient fangs. Seriously, how can anyone get anything done with these? Midoriya sighs into the kiss and seems to practically melt, an action that isn't the best thing for Hitoshi, since it leaves two parted lips in front of him that are so inviting he can't help but deepen the kiss just a little. Except, just a little turns out to be not that at all. Hitoshi can't help it, though. His crush is right here, kissing him, the sweet taste of crimson still on his tongue and smearing over both of their lips. Hitoshi has never felt so weak for anything in his entire life. It's not just light pepperings of kisses, or just a slow press of lips anymore, and Hitoshi feels warm all over while licking into his crush's mouth and feeling a shudder run through the body beneath him while reciprocating the action. The room feels heated and pleasantly fuzzy, like the background of a dream, and boy does it sure feel like a dream right now. Hitoshi is here on cloud 9, making out with Midoriya, something that he never thought would ever happen in a million lifetimes, and it's all thanks to this stupid quirk that he still doesn't want. Air becomes a secondary necessity, the first previously being blood, but replaced by the sweet taste of Midoriya's sighs. But Hitoshi does eventually pull away to let the other breathe. A terrible mistake on his own part, really, because now he can actually see that cute freckled face, dusted in pink, lips kiss-bitten and oh so tempting for Hitoshi to just dive back in. Midoriya's eyes are still closed, like he's just as dazed as Hitoshi, lips parted and chest rising and falling in short intermissions. And when he does eventually open up his eyes, there's less of that pretty green and more of the darkened expanse of his pupils. As soon as they focus themselves, however, they widen to the size of saucers, staring up at Hitoshi in something akin to shock. Hitoshi's stomach drops, that feeling of uncertainty enhanced by 1,000,000%. Midoriya didn't want this. Midoriya didn't want this, but he didn't know how to tell Hitoshi no. Midoriya hates him. He's shocked at how Hitoshi is such a scumbag who can't even control himself. Whoa, leaves Midoriya's mouth in a breathy noise of astonishment. Whoa? It doesn't sound like the thing someone who's upset would say, especially not with the gleam in Midoriya's eyes that he only gets when talking about quirks. I'm sorry, Hitoshi goes to say, because he's about to be borderline distraught at having violated one of his classmates. But as soon as the words leave his mouth, he freezes. That is not his voice. It came from him, yes, but it is not his. Hitoshi looks over to where one of his hands rests on Midoriya's hips, finding scarred knuckles and crooked fingers, such a shocking discovery that he scrambles backwards and away from the other, only to stumble over the pant legs that are suddenly too long for him. Midoriya sits up too, face still pink from their makeout, but that sparkle does not leave his eyes. Shinsou, that's incredible! He exclaims with a smile, reaching for his discarded notebook and pen. Hitoshi takes that moment to dart his eyes over to one of the mirrors in his room, finding the sight before him just as shocking as hearing someone else's voice come from his throat. There are 2 Midoriyas in the room, though as soon as the realization settles, Hitoshi knows that the one in oversized clothing is him. It's bewildering, being in a body that isn't his own, and Hitoshi feels like a fish out of water, even more so than he did when he was getting his quirk traded. That is so neat, Midoriya goes in, engrossed in scribbling onto the pages of his notebook. Do you think the amount of blood you consume affects the time limit, or how long you can stay in a person's form, or maybe something to do with the blood type? Midoriya stops the beginning of a ramble when looking up at Hitoshi's, his own face. Hitoshi starts, still finding it incredibly weird to hear the other's voice leave his throat. Yeah, I'm okay. It's just, this is really weird. His subconscious pulls one of his hands to grip the back of his neck, a nervous habit, but he rips it off himself just as quickly. If this is Midoriya's body, he doesn't think it's all right for him himself to touch it. But then again, he's already done far more than touching to the actual Midoriya. "How do you feel?" Midoriya asks, unknowing of Hitoshi's inner turmoil. "Other than this being super odd, I feel all right, I guess. The pain is gone, if that's what you mean," Hitoshi answers. "That's good," Midoriya says then. After the general weirdness passes a bit, do you think we can keep taking notes?" he asks earnestly. "And, maybe doing that other thing, too?" Hitoshi waves his temporarily scarred hands out in front of him. "I don't need any more. Plus, I wouldn't want you to lose too much blood just because of some stupid cravings." Hitoshi already feels bad that there's a darkened bruise on the other's neck, though a very stupid, very hormonal side of his brain is ecstatic to know he's the one to leave that mark. Despite the blood loss, there's a brilliant red saturating Midoriya's face. "I was talking about the other thing," he admits bashfully, eyes finding the ceiling more interesting. "After you figure out how to change back, of course. It would be way too awkward to kiss a clone of myself." He gives a weak laugh to that, an attempt to leave behind the lingering awkwardness. Wait a minute. Did Hitoshi hear that right? There can't be any reasonable explanation as to why Midoriya would want to kiss Hitoshi again. Maybe this quirk has a side effect that makes Hitoshi hear what he wants to hear. "Only if you're okay with that, obviously," Midoriya adds when Hitoshi takes far too long to respond, instead staring at the other in sheer disbelief. The words snap Hitoshi back into reality. Sure, yes," he says way too enthusiastically, mentally wincing. At least, it's not his own vocal cords that say it. He'd never be able to live that down. A smile as warm as Hitoshi had felt a few minutes ago finds its way onto Midoriya's face, still painted in a blushy mess. Suddenly, this quirk and its stupid side effects don't seem so bad anymore, in Hitoshi's opinion.